Here are all the topics covered in the US political parties revision video. This video will focus on comparing party policy between the UK and US parties. There are many crossovers with the elections and the election system with the UK and US political parties. Some elements of this part of the revision video will be covered in the elections revision video. Now let's take a comparison of party policy in the UK and the US. At first glance, the comparisons look obvious. Both the UK and US have a party on the right, Conservatives and Republicans respectively, and both have a party on the progressive left strand, Democrats and Labour. However, an examination of their respective manifestos or party platforms in the US reveals a slightly different picture. Conservatives and Republicans largely agree in the following areas. Lower taxes for both businesses and individuals. In 2018, Trump cut both income tax and corporate tax rates, which lowered from 35% to 21%. In the UK, recent Conservative Prime Ministers have also sought to cut taxes where possible. Thatcher reduced the top rate of income tax from 83% to 60% in 1980, and then 40% in 1989. Both parties agree that lower taxes promote innovation and productivity, and that wealth will trickle down to benefit all sectors of society. Then we have a strong armed forces. In Trump's first term, the military budget leapt from just over $600 billion to around $700 billion as part of his pledge to rebuild the USA's military strength. While the UK budget has not seen anything like the same growth, the Conservatives were strongly committed to the renewal of the Trident nuclear submarine programme and the retention of the nuclear deterrent. Also, as part of a strong nation-state, Trump came to power partly on the idea of America First platform and sought to push for better trade deals, especially with China. The same enthusiasm for nation-state can be seen in the Eurosceptic wing of the Conservatives and a desire to bring back control from the EU areas, such as immigration and fishing policies. Both parties also share a wariness of international bodies, the Conservatives with the EU and the Republicans with the UN and the World Health Organization, both of which had their funding cut under Trump. Then there is the importance of individual freedom, not at least in the sense of shrinking the state. Reagan famously quipped in a speech, the 9 most terrifying words in the English language are, "I'm from the government and I'm here to help." Similar language can also be found in Thatcher's promise to roll back the frontiers of the state. Both seek to decry what is often portrayed and parodied as the nanny state. Yet in office and in times of crisis, both Republicans and Conservatives have expanded the surveillance state in the interests of national security following terror attacks. This can be seen in the US through the Patriot Act of 2001, passed by George W. Bush in the wake of 9/11, and in the UK via the Counter-Terrorism and Border Security Act of 2019. Both suggest that for Conservatives in politics, there must be a compromise between individual liberty and the deference of the nation. Then we have abandoning fiscal prudence in times of a crisis. Both parties are ready to abandon fiscal prudence and cut government spending when faced with a crisis. The COVID-19 pandemic saw both Trump and Johnson pass huge emergency measures of government support at great expense to keep businesses afloat and workers receiving an income. In essence, they had no choice, but it does reveal that, as with most great democratic parties in the Western world, ideology and fixed political principles can, on occasion, be jettisoned in the name of pragmatism and the national interests. Labour and Democrats largely agree in the following areas. Reducing the economic gap. Both parties desire to reduce the gap between the richest and poorest in society and make the wealthiest and big corporations pay their fair share in taxes. The 2019 Labour manifesto contained a pledge to introduce a new 45% income tax starting at £80,000 a year and a new 50% rate starting at £125,000 a year. Meanwhile, the Democrat platform in 2020 contained the following pledge: we will make sure the wealthy pay for their fair share in taxes. They also agree on better public services for all. Both parties have a strong commitment to improving public services for all, but especially the poorest in society, and increasing public spending to achieve this goal. Blair's administration saw education, while spending on the NHS was also ramped up. Under Obama, there was a concerted effort to extend healthcare to nearly all uninsured Americans, leading to the Affordable Care Act being passed in 2010. Then there is international cooperation. Both Democrats and Labour can be seen as more enthusiastic about global bodies and internationalism. The bulk of the Labour Party was pro-EU in the referendum. Obama's administration followed a more multilateral approach to foreign policy. In the hope of persuading Iran's regime to abandon its nuclear ambitions, Obama pointedly rejected Bush's axis of evil terminology and worked for better relations with countries traditionally less well disposed towards the USA. We also have multiculturalism. Both parties are also open to and positive about the benefits of multiculturalism and diverse society, and are less focused on cutting immigration numbers. Democrats and Labour alike pride themselves on being inclusive and tolerant. Each draws substantial electoral support from ethnic minorities, especially the Democrats from African Americans, and Labour from a range of voters from the minority ethnic groups. In 2019, when Labour performed poorly overall, it still led among voters from minority ethnic groups by 64% to 20%. Historically, the Democrats since the 1960s have been strong supporters of the civil rights movements and can count on many prominent activists among their ranks, including Jesse Jackson and John Lewis. In the UK, Labour has long promoted racial equality measures, passing the original Race Relations Act in 1965. It should be noted, though, that more illegal immigrations were deported under Obama than under Bush. It would be wrong to assume, however, that both party pairings align exactly as significant and differences exist between them. Let's start by looking at policy. The Republican Party is considerably more conservative on social issues. While same-sex marriage was brought in by Conservative Prime Minister David Cameron, the Republicans, especially those from the South and Midwest, are more wedded to traditional values. The evangelical religious right still holds considerable sway among Republicans, a powerful voting bloc largely absent from UK politics. Furthermore, Republicans are much more uniformly pro-life and anti-abortion than it is with the British Conservatives. Gun rights and the defence of the Second Amendment are also pretty much an article of faith for most Republicans, again in stark contrast to their UK counterparts, where the issue is rarely prominent and never partisan. There is also a militant libertarian and anti-government streak among many Republicans that is largely absent from most Conservatives. A fair number of Republican-inclined Americans have adopted anti-vaccination stances and during the COVID-19 pandemic protested against imposed lockdowns and the compulsory wearing of masks. Many simply do not like being told what to do by their own government. By contrast, such militant libertarianism is largely absent from the UK and Conservatives, and they focus more on challenging international, primarily EU, interference in British affairs. The debate and party positions over healthcare is also a clear difference between the UK and US. Even within the Democrats, many oppose socialist healthcare plans advocated by its most progressive wing and the likes of Bernie Sanders. Many Democrats remain suspicious of a single dominant state-provided healthcare system. By contrast, in the UK, devotion to and protection of the NHS is a prerequisite for both Labour and Conservative parties. The political battleground of health is fought instead over areas such as funding and the role of private providers in delivering NHS services. Even during Brexit, the Leave campaign gained much support through its notorious battle bus promise to spend an additional £350 million a week on the NHS, the amount it claims the UK would save by leaving the EU. Additionally, the cross-party support during COVID-19 crisis of capping for the NHS staff has no direct parallel in the US. Now let's look at ideology. UK parties have traditionally been more ideological and influenced by key political thinkers. The Labour Party, for example, owes a considerable ideological debt to socialist thinkers such as Webbs, while its famous Clause 4 was essentially taken out of the Marx and Engels playlist, with its commitment to wholesale nationalisation. Similarly, the Conservative Party, also, although historically less wedded to a formal ideology, has often embraced the ideas of Burke and the Nation of Disraelism, or One Nation Toryism. Even the more strident conviction brand of conservatism seen in the 1980s owes a debt to classic liberalism and laissez-faire economics. The Conservative name assumes an affinity with the past and suspicion of the abstract radical ideas, while Labour harks back to its 1900s origins as the party of and for the working class. Over in the US, meanwhile, party labels are meaningless. Both support the notion of a republican democracy. Their names give no real clue to their origins or their policy positions. Now let's look at the relationship between party leaders. We also gain insight into the parties through examining the relationships between their leaders. Conservative Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher and Republican President Ronald Reagan got on famously in the 1980s, which makes complete sense since they shared commonly held commitment to free market and opposition to Soviet totalitarianism. Less obvious, perhaps, was the close relationship between Conservative Republican George W. Bush and Labour's Tony Blair, especially over foreign policy in the Middle East, the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. However, it is also assumed that there was a lack of any personal chemistry between Republican Trump and Conservative May. Meanwhile, Democrat Obama apparently turned down no fewer than 5 requests from Downing Street to hold bilateral meetings with Labour Prime Minister Gordon Brown at the UN in New York and during the G20 summit in 2009. Do not therefore assume that leaders from the equivalent parties always get on well with each other and vice versa. In short, it might be argued that on most policy positions, the Republicans remain to the right of the Conservatives, while the Democrats are to the right of Labour. There is no clear amount of policy crossover, but also important differences. In the main, these reflect some of the differences in the political culture and priorities of the two countries.